Hi, everybody. My name is Stuart Sayger, and I'm here to talk about my 20 years of drawing comic books, from G.I. Joe to Transformers to the Joker to LEGO Bionicle. You're here with us on SplashPages.
Like Kari said, we met him at Terrificon, and he's had quite a career, 20 plus years drawing characters from Batman to people on a doomed ship in the sea in a tragic story about a strange European local. And despite his content, which ranges from terrifying to whatnot, he's actually a really nice guy, very personable. So everybody, the great, the bespectacled, the good-humored, the one, the only, Mr. Stuart Sayger.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for having me. Now, I want you guys to know I'm participating too, but I am sticking with the San Pellegrino, which is fancy water. But
No, that's fine.
I'm here. I'm here to participate.
No, you're doing good. Welcome. Enjoy.
All right.
Thank you. Yeah. There you go. That guy's ready. This guy's ready to party. You know. So
actually, Drew, before we get started, I just figured let's kick it off talking about Terrificon. Since we did meet you there, how was Terrificon for you?
For me or for Drew?
Oh, I had a great time. I was in a red suit. I was giving Stuart water all the time. He was so hydrated. It was one of those where I kept looking at him like, "Are you good?" And he was like, "I'm good.
It was good.
Yeah,
that was the first year I'd done Terrificon, and I had heard about it for years and years. I had wanted to go. It was just a matter of me sort of having the right opportunity, not being already booked. But Mitch was very nice. I ran into him. I met him in person at the Baltimore Comic-Con the year before. I was actually at talking to Garcia Lopez, name drop at his booth, and Mitch heard Garcia Lopez say my name, and he said, "Are you Stuart Sayger?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "I'm trying to find you." And I thought, well, I'm right here at Garcia Lopez's booth, but he extended me the invitation, and it took about 2 seconds for me to agree to go to the show. Really cool show. I always kind of feel like there are 3 shows that are really related to one another in this industry, depending on exactly what you want to collect. But Heroes Con, Baltimore Comic Con, and Terrificon, those are the 3 shows that are really about old comic books, comic book artists. That's it. It's not overloaded with T-shirts or video games or anime, which I like those things. But if you want an intense comic book experience that's old comics and art, those are the 3 places to be.
I totally agree. It's a lot of Comic-Cons are taking the comic out of Comic-Con. It's all about celebrities and stuff. And, you got to remember why we're there,
They're really great. I had a wonderful time. So I was actually in Baltimore this last weekend, and it was good. They really are very similar. And to that end, there were so many people I saw at Terrificon who, I knew I was going to see them up later in Baltimore. And after you get a few shows like that sort of have this own culture, there are some people you start to see 4, 5, 6 times a year, and it's sort of like a little family. It's kind of nice.
So because we're always looking to expand and consider different cons, would you recommend going to Baltimore? Like if we were interested trying to get a table at Baltimore, would you recommend that, Stuart?
You guys, I love that show. You guys will have a blast there. If you like Terrificon, absolutely, Baltimore's great.
Oh, okay, good.
Absolutely. They've done it. I think it's been around for 25 years. And they always have a souvenir book, really high quality, full color hardcover souvenir book that focuses on some sort of creator-owned project in the industry. I know they've done Scary Godmother in the past. This year it was The Tick. And then they get, I don't know, 50, 60, 100 different new pinups just for that book.
Oh, okay.
Really cool.
Right.
Oh, that's cool.
Okay. That is cool. Okay, no problem. That sounds freaking awesome. I've always wanted to go. Every year something always comes up and I'm like, damn it. And they always have such amazing guests, and each time I'm like,
oh, I mean, listen, I just this last year, I didn't even get around to the whole room this year, but I mean, regular guys that I see there are, like I said, Garcia Lopez is always there. Joe Staten, Adam Hughes, Frank Cho.
right.
It just goes on. Jim Starlin was there. I have to go that far down the list before I get to Jim Starlin. Oh, Jim Lee was there this year.
Right.
It's
yeah.
I mean, it's pretty cool. A lot of times if you go to a show, you look at the guest list and maybe if you guys really want to see, if 1 or 2 of them cancel, then it can really break your heart. At that show, you know, if something horribly goes wrong and your top 5 guys can't make it, there's still so many quality guests. And me.
So, so, so it sounds like, you know, Stuart, you've been in the industry 20 years, you know, you've been doing it. So, you know, it sounds like you, again, not just a creator in it, but you're also a fan. So did you get to meet anybody in your time that you were just like, oh my, like you fanboyed out yourself? You're like, wow. Like,
you know, yes and no. So I never really suffered much of the, you know, the stardom effect to meet, you know, these guys that you've wanted to meet for so long. But yeah, I mean, I met so many people. I met Stan Lee. I really got to know Neil Adams really, really well. He was my childhood hero growing up. Um, Alice Cooper. I've met most of the Star Trek captains.
nice.
I will tell you, I think one of my favorite stories is relates to these guys, and I didn't meet either of them, but I was at a show in I think it was Wizard Philadelphia, way back when. Chris Helmsworth and Chris Evans, Captain America and Thor. Well, so those movies were just getting started, and those guys were the thing. And all I heard about were how many girls wanted to meet those guys, right? And so that's fine, and I believe it because they're celebrities and they were the hot shots. Well, it just so happened that from my booth, I saw the two of them walking down the hall, just sort of talking about the show. They weren't at their booth; they were just in street clothes doing their thing, and people noticed who they were. And I literally saw a girl walk into a pole from checking them out. You know, it was like an Archie comic book where it was like, you know, somebody falls down the manhole because they're checking somebody out. Literally, I saw this girl walk into this pole, and I just thought, man, those guys really have got like the charm, you know, and you can do that. Right. And I was so glad I got to see it. But stuff like that, it really only happens at a con.
Oh, absolutely.
I love that.
And it's funny you say that because I was at Wizard World Philly. I think it was like pre-pandemic. So it must have been like 2016, 2017. And that was around that time Avengers Infinity War would just come out. And, you know, everybody's like, oh my God, the events of that. And I don't know if you know the show Parks and Rec.
Just a little, yeah.
Yeah, so I was Chris Pratt's character, Andy Dwyer. But later on, he has a costume identity, which is Burt Macklin, who's an FBI agent and everything. So I was walking around as that character, cosplaying that. But I had a sign, and he has a quote, and it says, you know, from the bottom of my heart, my bad. So I spent the whole time at the con walking around with that sign. I just kept apologizing to Avengers.
Of course.
Yeah, just, you know.
That's what people forget. So cosplay, when I was first started to do these shows, cosplay really meant cosplay. You had to stay in character. Other people walk around and they say, I'm not cosplaying. I'm in costume.
Right.
But I'm not cosplaying.
Right.
I think that part got overlooked during the last 10, 15 years.
Yeah, it's definitely, you can kind of tell. I think it's the people that they're so committed to the character, they just stick to the script. And I feel like the people who really have the fun with it can just easily still be in character and just, you know, they can just, you know, take whatever. And I just remember this one Captain America, I kept apologizing. He had no idea who the fuck I was. I was just like, Cap, I'm really sorry. It was my bad. I just met my girlfriend's dad for the first time. There were bubbles. I lost my mind. I'm sorry. Like, please, you know, I'm so sorry. Everybody is dust now. It's a Kansas song out there. We're all just dust in the wind. And and my friend was just looking at me, he was like, he has no idea who the fuck you are, by the way. And I'm just like, what matters is you were there. And it's like, oh no, this was fucking hilarious. But he had no idea. So he's just like,
you needed to go on to another Captain America.
I did. And it's funny, I found a Star-Lord and we were like, well, why did we do this? I hope I know there's a part 2. Let's get redemption. And we're like, it's fine. James Gunn will do right by us. So, but Wizard World is always really solid. It's a great con. So
I missed them. I'm not joking. I remember when they came onto the scene. Truly, there was such a they were this big like rush of glitz that conventions didn't have before then. I remember, I think their first show was either Chicago 2000 or 2001, right around there. And I remember going to it, and this seems kind of funny to say now, but one of the things that I think Wizard really did that was kind of great for the comic book convention world was they really just made everything look very serious and professional in a way that I don't think we had gotten a lot of before. I remember going to Wizard shows and everything was a printed sign. You know, there were logos on things. There were big displays to let you know where you were supposed to go, what you're supposed to be. And it just kind of when nothing's handwritten anymore, you know, you really understand everybody's taking this seriously. I can remember it just sort of made everything seem professional. We hadn't had a lot of that. San Diego was big, but a lot of people couldn't make it to San Diego. But once that Chicago show rolled out and then Wizards started to add more and more, there was a brand identity. I don't even remember people saying, you know, are you going to conventions? I remember people just saying, are you going to Wizard? I mean, they really sort of standardized something. That was a big deal. Yeah, there, I just thought I'd throw that out. But,
no, totally.
I'll say this, going back to your question, as far as who were some people I met that really, you know, had the wow factor. I think the thing that was kind of neat about it is, and there aren't any names that come to mind immediately, is like really just sort of blowing me away. Neil was my guy, and I wanted to meet him.
Right.
And I did get to meet him. I took a deep breath because I know that he can be a strong flavor, but we got along swimmingly. And anytime I saw him at a show, we talked. But, you know, I remember one of the first times I saw Steranko, and Steranko was talking to a fan who just happened to have a deck of cards in their pocket. And Steranko saw it. I said, what are you doing with those deck of cards? And you guys know Steranko did a lot of magic. Steranko took this guy's deck of cards and very impromptu started doing magic tricks.
Whoa.
Well, yeah, and very good magic tricks. And it was really neat. The thing I kind of loved about it was, like, you realize that guy's just such a showman. I mean, he's got that look. His art is really strong. And he just sort of held the audience. It's things like that you don't really expect that I think are kind of what I love most. I grew up a Micronauts fan. I got to meet Michael Golden. So I know Michael Golden these days very well. And Golden's great. Golden is absolutely awesome. But, you know, you go to a show, you get to meet these people. And for the most part, right away, they're people, right? I mean, you realize they're people. There are just a few of them like Steranko that just have this sort of sparkle. They're a little different.
Yeah. And I think the thing that's sometimes important is you have to kind of separate that, because, you know, they're, like you said, they're people too, and sometimes they have bad days. And, you know, while I'm not really an advocate for someone having a bad day and they take it out on a fan who, you know, spent money to meet them or said such, like, that's not fair to the fan. But I feel like sometimes you should take that into context. You know, it's like you hear a bad story, you know, for me, I'm like, oh, that's really sad. But the writer brain in me is like, well, how did you approach them? You know, what did you say? And I'm not accusing you. I just want to get the facts. So if it really is you were a nice person and they just were just a jerk, I'm like, well, I'm really sorry you had that experience, you know?
You know, first of all, you never can know the whole story, right? You know, you don't know what happened the 5-6 hours before. I do remember a friend of mine told me that he met Michael Turner. And he said, I said, yeah, how was the experience? And I'd met Michael Turner a couple times, and I'd never heard anything from anybody regarding Turner other than he was just, you know, the most outgoing guy, period. And this guy, my friend, said, yeah, you know, he wasn't that way to me. And he described the situation. He said he kind of signed my book and pushed it back to me. He didn't really talk that much. And I remember saying, well, where and when was this? And I figured it out. There was one year at Pittsburgh where Turner signed the day before he had to go in and have surgery, and he was in a lot of pain. And he was still at the show, right? And so my friend thought that Turner might have been maybe a little bit unsocial. What he didn't know was that, you know, he was giving absolutely everything he had. No one else would have actually been there doing that, but Turner was that invested. You know, and I'm so glad that I got to say, well, let me tell you what you didn't know.
Right.
But you know, we've all had bad days, and I don't know. I'm very fortunate to have the fans I have. I'll tell you this. Here's my outlook on this. I was at a Kiss convention. I did 27 covers for the comic book Kiss, rock band, and I was asked to be a guest at a convention of theirs. And so one of the guys who was there was Mark Slaughter. If you guys know who Mark Slaughter is, he's from the band Slaughter. Yeah. And he had 2 pretty good radio hits. And at the show, he performed one of them. And I asked him, I said, you know, with all due respect, you've been singing these songs to fans for 30 years now, and they love them. But for you, it's been 30 years. How do you summon the energy to make it fresh, to keep it meaningful, to not get tired of it? And he gave me what I thought was awesome, great advice. And he said, however big the audience, big or small, there's always somebody in the audience who's really into it. And I just find the person who's really enjoying it, and I play it for them. And their energy, I sort of focus on them. Their energy, drives me, and I drive them. And he said, the funny thing is, I may have done it, 100 times, but this is the first for them.
Right.
That's what I kind of always try to remember, and I think about this if I do a comic book convention. I've been to comic book conventions where, they've got my name up and they treat me like a big star. And I've also been at some where, there are 100 million stars before me, that much bigger names than me, Bernard Perez Miller, those kind of guys.
Right.
But, you never know which fan came there to see you and has your book in their backpack. And, walk past those guys. I'm probably not going to get the line Chris Claremont has, but I mean, I was next to him at Terrificon, and there were guys who walked past him to see me, who wanted to talk to me about Bionicle.
Right.
So you're there from time to time. You get to be that guy for somebody.
Absolutely. I mean, everyone has a story, I mean, again, that's, it's another reason why, again, I was like, when are you free? And you're like, oh yeah, you could just come really early. I'm like, oh, we can do early. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
Like literally, I think Kari, if I'm right, we were interviewing Mark Waid, and we just walked like right from interviewing Mark Waid, just right to you. Like, you good, Stuart? And he was like, yeah, we're good. All right, Kari, go.
Yeah, why not? Well, first of all, you guys only asked me about comic books, which I had to be able to shoot from the hip on. You didn't ask me to take a trigonometry test. There's no brushing up for this. I just go.
Oh,
well,
yeah.
and then you and I got into this great conversation about Goya afterwards, and we had to cut it short because we were really undermanned. We had like 4 of us, and we needed to have the booth and 2 panel goers at each time. So, and somebody to run batteries and bathroom breaks and everything else. So it was like, as soon as the panel started, we had to go. And
the weird thing about that is,
that
is like the 3rd or 4th convention in a row that I had a conversation about Goya. I don't know how Goya keeps coming up. I'm not kidding. It's my wife's probably in the other room laughing because she says, yes, what is it about Goya in this household? But I actually want to do this at one of these comic book conventions when I have enough time to plan it out. The show promoters will always ask if you'll do a panel. Do you have any ideas for a panel? And I really want to do one of comic book creators talking about old master painters.
Yo, that would be awesome.
I would love that.
Yeah, I would love it too. And believe me, I can talk all day about it.
Listen, if you do that, like if you get to next year's Terrificon, Kari will talk to Mitch about moderating that. She'll be like, I'm in.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Well, I'll happily do it. The funny thing is, I've asked a couple comic creators if they're interested in doing it. And sometimes they get a little bit, a little leery. But if I narrow it down and I say, what if we just talk about Rembrandt? Then they usually say, okay, I know Rembrandt. We can do that. So as long as it's not too big and wide. My thing is, I don't want to bore the audience. I mean, they might be amused by how wound up I am by some of this stuff. But here's the thing: almost everybody who draws comic books these days, they draw comics because of their love of comics. Well, we learn to love comics when we're very young. We learn to love art when we're very young, and hopefully our interest in art and comics grows and grows and grows. And at some point, you will put all the pieces together and you'll see the connection between, Manet and who would rhyme with Manet? Jim Mooney. I don't know, but all these, every artist looks at every other artist and learns something if we can. So you look at history paintings by somebody like Peter Paul Rubens and the big heroic actions. That's what Avengers comics are. I mean, there's a link between these two.
Yeah.
Speaking of
that's my plug for my panel.
Yeah, I'm about to say, Stuart, start brainstorming now. You got a year. Let's go.
Work it.
Yeah. Get the slides ready. You're like, okay, next slide. Okay, good.
You've got the Conan thing going now, so that's got a lot of artist history behind it with historical artist type of influences.
Conan is rich. So, yeah, one of my favorite shows to go to each year is the Windy City Pulp and Paper show, and Conan for a lot of us is a comic book character, but for everybody who's been around longer, well, he's a pulp character. and he's got a longer history than Superman ever dreamed of having. And if you go to
Mm-hmm.
something like Windy City Pulp and Paper, you can see how big and broad Robert E. Howard is.
Oh, absolutely.
I wish I could remember all the highlights of it, but I had dinner with Jim Shooter about 2 years ago. It was this
Nice.
great dinner at the Hall of Heroes convention, and he
Mhm.
was really telling me just how big Conan really was for Marvel. I mean, I think Conan #1 is 1970, and Roy Thomas writes it. But
Mhm.
I'd grown up working in a comic shop and got the job in 1983, and the real heyday of Conan is the 70s,
Right.
right? So I'm 13 in 86, so I've missed this, but I've just sort of caught the echoes of it. I think this comic book people don't realize just how big Conan was within comics in the 70s. And to that point, there was a period where I think Conan was carrying more titles than Spider-Man was, if you count the magazines,
Mhm.
right? I mean, his circulation numbers were through the roof. You can look at the Mego action figures and see which characters they made. It's like it's got all the Marvel heroes and the DC heroes, and then Conan, who was licensed. I'm glad it's doing well. Again, I'm glad that it's back, but I think comic book people, if you weren't around in the 70s, you just don't know.
Well, I think, what's really impressive is that, these characters, which feel very kind of pulp, very niche, like you think Conan, you think The Shadow, you think Solomon Kane, even somebody like Jonah Hex, they're up from a specific era of comics. And you would think, oh, the cowboy era is gone. The warriors, like Conan, are gone. Even characters like Solomon Kane, who's just like this, kind of pure, old-fashioned Puritan paranormal investigator kind of thing. You wouldn't think that but they have a huge audience, and they're still, their stories are still, even The Shadow is still a great audience, where there occasionally stories still pop up. So, like you said, it feels very niche, but they have that audience who still follows them, and it's crazy to think that, again, like, their quote of heyday is gone, but they're still
They're
kicking.
big, and it's funny because I have a list of those type of characters in my head that I know guys who just love them. Flash Gordon is not a
Mm-hmm.
pulp character, but Flash Gordon, his first strip is, I think, January 7th, 1934. So he beats Superman by about 4 years.
Right.
Most of what happens in DC in the first couple of years is largely influenced by Flash Gordon. And I still
Mhm.
love Flash Gordon.
Of course.
I grew up on the 1979 Flash Gordon Filmation cartoon.
Mhm.
And I mean, if you come see me at convention, I can draw Princess Aura out of my head.
Bam.
This stuff, comic books don't never exist in a vacuum, although we kind of treat them like they do. And I know that's true because comic book people, I mean, look, if you even look at the way we store our comic books, there's such a displeasure or distaste against a comic being magazine sized. The comic book people often just stay in their lane. But these things all reference each other. We don't have comic books without the characters you're discussing. And to that end, if you
Mhm.
ever want to go to a really cool show, try the Windy City Pulp and Paper show. It is not a comic book convention. There are a lot of comic books there,
Right.
and again, a boy, I see Steranko every year. He's there and he's shopping more than he is signing. I'm not kidding.
Mhm.
But that's a show that shows you all the things that come before comics and really, tells you how they all connect. And I love that show because I know a lot about comic books, but I can go to that one and there's a lot I don't know about in that room. And the guys who
Mhm.
go to that are diehard. You will learn a lot at that show. Small
Those
show.
are the best.
Yeah, they're absolutely fantastic.
And
But
you lucked out
yeah.
when you were, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but
Yeah.
you totally lucked out when you were younger because your parents were into antiques and dealing them. So you got to go and like hit all the estate sales and stuff and just be like, oh yeah, I'm getting all these old comic books for a lot less than I would have to pay going and hitting the brand new stuff on the stands. So wasn't that?
Oh, I mean, that's my secret weapon. When people always ask me how I got into this industry or, how I learned to draw, I mean, I always tell them my secret weapon was my parents, and my parents liked art. That sounds like a simple thing to say, but I mean, I had friends whose parents, I could tell they didn't think much of it. They never drew. My parents I remember one time they went to a garage sale when I was about 5 years old, and they bought a box of colored pencils. And then, and it's really a fond memory of mine, I can remember it was summertime, we didn't have air conditioning, and the windows were open, and it's late at night, and my parents were drawing cartoons in bed to sort of amuse each other, silly things, while Steve Martin was wearing that white suit on Saturday Night Live.
Nice.
It was like, that doesn't seem like a big deal, but those are creative people, and they really liked antiques. I went to a lot of shows when I was young. Typically, I remember buying a lot of comic books off the spinner rack that were 40 cents. But if you went to a flea market or any kind of used goods show, you could buy old comic books for a dime. I bought a lot of comics from Dragon's Lair out of Ohio, which would come and do antique shows in Indiana for a dime. I remember I really was into Nick Hardy Teen Titans when I was about 10. And I dug deep, and I think I paid 40 cents, which was the same price as the new comic for Teen Titans #2, the 1960. Is it? Well, it's not 1960, 64, 65 issue. But that's what I wanted, but I had access to it. And I had parents who, got it and supported it. I remember wanting some old comics, and we would go to a show like that, and my dad would throw me a couple bucks, and it would be, spend it wisely. And that meant I could go buy, if I only had $1, I could buy 10-cent comics. Or if I said, no, here's this, old Batman I really wanted that was, a 10-cent, Batmite cover, it might be 75 cents. But if that's what I wanted, there wasn't any sort of, discussion that, hey, you shouldn't be paying 75 cents for a comic book. They got it. So incredibly fortunate for that. Even to this day, when I see my parents, I love talking to them about art. They always say they don't know anything, but they know a ton. If you grow up in a household where you handle this stuff and your livelihood is based on, a lot of this is going to seep into you. And I remember when I was trying to break into the comic book industry, my parents, what they sold mostly were lamps, lighting. Okay, my first portfolio review. You wait in line, and it used to be at a convention, there would be editors, and you would wait in line and you could get a review. My first review was from Bob Schreck, who had just been hired by DC, and this was just before they handed in Batman.
Right.
And, you should make sample pages of all the things that Marvel and DC would be publishing. So, Green Lantern, Spider-Man, Batman. Well, I made Witching Hour sample pages, and DC hadn't published Witching Hour for, 20 years, 30 years at this point. But I always liked horror. I always liked that era of comics. I always wanted to draw things that were more naturalistic. When you draw Witching Hour, you're not drawing a new modern house. You draw an old broken, Victorian house if you wanted. And Shrek was going through my pages, and I had one panel that was the interior of a library. And in the back, not a big deal, in the scene was a panel lamp, which is usually stained glass. It's been heated against a mold to make panels. And I just drew an antique lamp out of my head. And I remember he looked at everything and he said, "Nice lamp." And I thought, of course I can draw a lamp, because that's what my parents do. But think about that then. If I have to draw something that's period oriented, I can make deco up out of my house or out of my head. I can make Art Nouveau up. I can make the 50s up. I've handled so much of stuff. It got easy. That's kind of a nice thing about drawing comic books. When you have to be able to draw these worlds, I was exposed to so much of it. Yeah, and I know you're going to ask me about Death Ship, and the funny thing is that's when I met Bob Schreck, and Bob Schreck ended up being the editor who hired me for Death Ship years and years later. That's how we met. And he filed away in the back of his head this young artist that he had met. And any good editor will do that. They will, when they meet an artist, even if they don't hire him, they'll realize what he can do. And if he's good enough, they'll just put him in the back of his head someplace when they need that guy. They can pull the name up. And yeah, he called me out of the blue, and I of course remembered who he was and was delighted.
Damn it, Kari, he knew exactly what I was just about to segue to ask him.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, Kari, you go. Kari, you take this
Psychic.
one. I'm just gonna drink.
Oh, I've just been drinking. No, we covered Goya. this is it's hard to find you, and this is a good thing, but I can't buy you digitally. And this is something because like I like to send these guys or grab stuff and like get it on Comixology or something like that. And you are very hard to find, like, and if it is, it's a bootleg as far as your work goes. So it was
I've
like
never
we
offered
were
my own work
grabbing stuff.
digitally. Yeah, I've never offered my own work digitally. I'm such a diehard. I love the paper. I'm even kind of anti trade paperback only because I like to read in bed and I like to read on my side and they don't stay open. So I they call them floppies and call them what you will. That's still my favorite. But I believe that, you know, a lot of what I've worked on in this industry has been a licensed property. G.I. Joe, Transformers, Kiss. What are some other things? Alex Cooper, I did Conan. You know, so there may be some instances where getting the books out in a digital form may involve more complicated licenses. I did 2 years drawing LEGO Bionicle. You know, DC published that, but it was for LEGO. I have no idea who actually owns the rights for reprint. I assume LEGO.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we were worried when we had you on about what we could pull up because where it might have come from originally or gotten somewhere if we grabbed it. So we got like some pictures, but when he's talking about his books, check out, this is The Wise Old Owl signed by him. This book is huge, but it is
Yes.
so gorgeous. The pages, this was by my way, my favorite story in here.
The
But the pages
Virgilina.
are so
Okay.
glossy and have, yes. Oh, it goes in it. Well, you can explain it. It's got some great history and stuff, but this is just a gorgeous book. And I don't mind that it's larger. I went out and bought bigger boxes because I've been buying some bigger books lately to have everything kept in. And I I could not I cannot fault you for wanting to release something and have somebody hold it and feel it because I got so much more out of this than when I do read things digitally. And most of the time I just buy something, look at it, say that's pretty, and then I read it on Kindle or Marvel or wherever I get it
Dare
from.
you. Dare you.
Just because I don't, it's because I don't want to screw up because I'm a klutz and I don't want to be like reading it and spill something on it or, tear a page or accidentally have the tape on something, damage the comic. So
You know,
that's what,
here's the funny
but then
thing.
I get that feeling when I do read yours, I'm just like, I should read more of mine this way, instead of just bagging them, boxing them, putting them away.
I always have. So here's one of the things I think is really interesting about reading a book in general. You know, we're in a society where we consume an awful lot of media. Okay, we might all watch the same movie, right? But if we're not together, we're having a very different experience. You know,
Right.
even if it's sort of we all have the same DVD and we say, all right, we're going to watch it at a viewing party. You've got a different television than I do. You've got a different sound system than I do. You may have different settings on your television than I do. And so it's really hard to have the exact same experience. You know, movies, music, the same way. You know, the stereo system you have determines a lot of what you think of that music. If we're all holding the same comic book, okay, the comic book is really consistent, and the only thing that's really going to affect our experience is our surroundings there and maybe our light source. But we don't have this intermediate bit of technology that has to, facilitate the ingesting of this media. You know, we could agree we're all going to read at noon, with the sun directly above us and try to sort of standardize the experience. But what I'm getting at is I really love the experience of this. You know, what is this? It's got a weight, it's got a girth to it. I think the paper that a book is printed on matters not just to how it feels, but how you turn the pages. And there becomes a psychological interaction between the thing. So Wise Old Owl is comic book proportion. I've talked to people who say this is magazine size, and I say, well, not exactly. It's the width of a magazine, but it's taller. So it has the same proportions of a comic book. So it should echo and say comic book to you, even though it's a little bit big. Well, why does that matter? Because the size of an object affects how we feel about it. You know, if you print this exact same thing, but it's on really floppy paper and it's baseball card size, you'll read it differently. You'll even hold it from your face at a different length. So I actually feel like when I make a comic book, it's really fun to consider all of this. I've told young creators, one of the cool things about a comic book is you have to turn the page. And what that means is if you have a 32-page comic book, you'll turn the page 16 times. And that means 16 times you'll stop at the bottom panel here, turn the page, and start at the top. And each one of those is an opportunity to surprise somebody. If you really want to surprise a reader, you put something in the first panel on the left-hand side at the top. The trick is you really only can surprise somebody once per issue. If you use that trick more than once, it becomes really hokey, right? Mm-hmm. But a really good comic book will take all that into account. And a really good comic book will do the same thing for, where an issue ends and where the next one begins. I always thought it was weird when I see a comic book that has really, really badly placed ads. I hate to throw Dark Horse under the bus, but I'm going to do this. There's a Star Wars Tales that has it's Darth Vader, Boba Fett, and Han Solo, and they're all in the cantina. And I think it's Darth Vader, but it might be Boba Fett. One of them's talking to the other, and we see somebody say, "You," and you turn the page, and it's an ad, and you turn the page, and it's a 2-page spread of ads, and then you finally turn the page, and you see who it is the person was responding to. Now, a lot of times it's really easy to just look past the ads and turn them, and not even pay attention to them. But either way, that stopped the story. It didn't create more tension for me because, oh my gosh, I got to turn the page faster and see who it is. It took me out of the moment. And as somebody arranging the book, I would say, boy, you just killed all the energy right there. So I guess I have to criticize the editor or somebody, but that's a big deal. How you space the book, even where you put the ads, can matter.
Right.
Well, and this book is so quality. Like you were saying, how you read it, I'm holding it and I'm like, I have like my fingers to the side and the spine here and a little finger kind of holding the spine. And then, but I don't want to mess up anything. And I've got it kind of towards my body and I'm flipping very carefully each page, but the quality of your book is so good. It's nice. But and I think what probably got me doing the digital thing more is there aren't as many comics that are as just, they feel great. I love holding a book too, but I've gotten to where sometimes I buy the like $170 first edition signed with this, and this, and then I read the Kindle after I get that book. I flip through it, I sniff it, I hug it, and I put it in my closet so that I don't damage it, and then I read it in a different way. But I think with the comic thing, it's easier to read digital on some of them because a lot of comic books don't care as much these days with making the super high quality stuff. Distillery has recently come out and they offer a really weird experience where you can get, well, not weird, but they do a very strange digital collectible as well, so that the way you read it on their site, it reads differently than just flipping through a comic. But they also have like high quality pages, thick paper, big books, longer than normal things. So they're another company that is offering like multiple different types of experiences for the comics. But just getting some, like if I go down to the comic book shop and just grab some of the regular on the rack stuff anymore, it's just kind of like, okay, I can flip through it, but the papers are kind of thin still. And
so we are spoiled is the problem. I really believe this. I can remember I remember when Baxter paper was introduced, and that was a big deal. I mean, it was a brighter, whiter paper, and for so long we'd had just newsprint, right? And then if we had anything that wasn't newsprint, we had some treasuries. We might have had some digests, but there were very few changes in format. We've got so many nice comics coming out now, digital coloring, digital pre-press. I can remember when was it Power Comics came out with things like Cobalt Blue in the early 80s, if you guys even remember this, and there were some small independent companies who worked really, really hard and spent a fortune making a fairly professional looking product that by today's standards we would say this is fairly amateurish. Not that they didn't put good work into it, but digital pre-press and controls made everything so much better. When I broke into comic books, my first offering was my self-published comic book, Shiver in the Dark. It was a black and white interior book, and at the time, most all independent books were black and white. I think the last black and white book I've seen that was black and white at all was A Walking Dead, and that was just black and white based on momentum. I can't even imagine launching an independent comic book right now and having to be black and white unless that's somehow sort of a gimmick. What we're used to getting, what we're able to get for, you know, the baseline of what a comic book can be at this point is actually really high quality product. But I'm very flattered you said what you said about the Wise Old Owl. The format is a little bit different. I loved it. I loved how it felt. I've talked to different printers, and I came across this paper stock in this format, and I just thought it had such a nice presence to it that I wanted to go with that. And I'm delighted that you like the Virgilina character and story. I giggled a little bit when I came up with her. It hit me kind of all at once. But you know, I told you my parents like antiques. I've already talked about art history. Does it surprise you I had to have a character based from Dante's Inferno? No. Right.
No. Well, and kind of that would segue to my question about Bloodship, because I'm reading it, and you know, I enjoy that you really fleshed out the essentially, as we know, because if you've ever read Dracula, the doomed crew of the Demeter, which, you know, it's kind of always it's interesting when people kind of flesh out things, because I always feel like it falls into two categories. It's like the thing you didn't ask for, and then the thing you didn't ask for, but the story was just done so well that you cared. Like it, and like, and if example, it's like the prequel to The Thing. You know, you didn't really need this because you know these people are dead. So you sympathize, but you don't really know how they died, because all you care about is the thing that killed them is going to get doused by fire by Kurt Russell, the flamethrower. But then you have like, it's like you think in terms of making it care, like you had Rogue One. You have this story about these people who their biggest accomplishment was getting the plans to destroy the Death Star to Mon Mothma, so they could do that in the original Star Wars, and all of them die. And you're like, and if I need to say this, if someone is going to accuse me of spoilers, it's been out for years. Deal with it. Sorry, Leo.
No.
I mean,
don't forget they made a prequel to the prequel, because you have Andor. You know,
there you go. So, you know, but my point being is that, again, it was just so well done that you cared about these people. So I feel like you and your collaborator on that, you guys fleshed out these people, and you made us really care about, you know, like I was kind of rooting for the captain and the boy and the jerk of the first mate, who's just such a, you know, just a meathead. I was like, I'm hoping you guys make it. I know you won't, but some part of me is like, you know, damn. And then, you know, especially it's like the way that you guys did it, especially your style. I kind of, my brain kind of drew parallels to the hyper realism, but like the kind of spookiness that I saw with a lot of early Tony Harris, you know, just that very realistic, spooky, you know, kind of quasi ethereal thing. So with all that said, when you're doing this, you know, that did you have like, you know, your copy of Bram Stoker's Dracula, like superimposed, stretched out, like, all right, that's okay. We're going to reference that. We're going to, you know, or did you just, I've read this, I'm going to roll with it.
So this, you've hit on what I think is one of the big questions for people who make comic books, period. In that very often we get to work on something that we care deeply about, or maybe have an investment in that some, you know, creators did before us. I think, see, I'm such a name dropper. I think it was John Byrne was talking about an interview one time that he kind of felt like his Fantastic Fours weren't real because, you know, real Marvel comics are Stan and Jack and Steve Ditko. Well, that was the stuff he loved, and that was the stuff that made him want to write and draw comics. And then it's a little bit odd when you sort of feel like you need to follow that up. And we have lots of things like this. This is kind of like, you know, somebody wanting to do a cover of a well-known song. And I pretty much feel that the best thing you can do is do the best thing that you can do and not be too worried about what came before you, right? I may be a good match to do that Dracula story, or I may be a bad match. Whichever it is I am, I should probably try to do whatever is the best thing that I have to offer. If I'm ill-suited for it and my best offering fails, okay, then that's what it is. But if I'm trying to live up to something that I'm inherently not, that's kind of a path for failure. So in the case of the Dracula book, Bob called me up and he offered me that book. And he actually offered me that book and another book, which I don't remember what it was, but it was going to be a 6-issue series, whereas the Dracula book was 4. And he said, do you want either one? And if you do, you can have whichever one you want. The other one was sort of a magical book with some children in it. And while on one hand, it would be nice to have 6 issues of work rather than 4, I knew that I wanted the Dracula. I knew I was a better fit for it. And I really didn't give it a whole lot of thought. Just, I felt a connection to it. I felt more interested and I felt it played to my strengths. And the editor was quick to agree with me. He said, I think you chose the right one, but you can have whatever you'd like. Now, I say that because I could have surprised him. I think this is kind of one of the things that maybe makes him a good editor is he says, well, how do I get the best work from an artist? I let him do what he wants to do and what he thinks he's going to enjoy. If I had said, no, Bob, I'm really interested in the other thing, then he might have said, really? Cool. Okay, then let's do that. Right. But I responded to the Dracula and we talked about what we wanted him to look like. And he could have looked any way. I mean, there are a lot of Draculas out there, a lot of vampires, and we both sort of responded to the Nosferatu film, sort of rat-like design. And in the case of Death Ship, if I recall, I think the concept and the pacing of the story was originally built as a screenplay. And it was moved around a bit to work better as a comic book. But, a comic book is broken up into 4 issues. Screenplay, once you've sold a ticket, somebody's going to sit through the whole thing. So you'll build them a little bit differently. But, Bob and I got along, and Bob was always a really good editor for me. And I think that Bob was very, very good. Everybody's different. I always think of an editor as a little bit like a coach. How does he get the best work out of me? And so he was good about telling me when he thinks I'm doing something good. And he was also good at saying, I think this can be better. What I liked about him was, for the most part, I feel like my job is to draw the comic book. The writer wrote the comic book. All the problems in the writing are fixed before, they're taken care of before I get involved. The editor will go over everything. But in the case of Death Ship, and it sounds like I'm being critical of Jerry's script, and I'm really not meaning to say that, but there was one thing that I really thought we should have changed in it, and it's only because the pacing of the comic book really matched the pacing of the movie as it was originally meant to be. And that was in the first issue, the story is built so that there's mystery and tension that builds regarding this Dracula character, and so much of his doings and killings happens off camera. As a movie, you can have somebody scream off camera and it's very effective. And then, 10 minutes later, we can find out what it is. Well, in a comic book, if you do something like that and we don't get an answer until an issue later, sometimes that can be a problem. I called Bob up and I said, in this whole first issue of this Dracula comic book, Dracula is not even in it. And I said, I kind of feel like we should give our fans their money's worth. If we say it's Bram Stoker's Dracula, where is he? And so what we did was, with his blessing, we moved a couple panels around and created a vacuum where we had one open page. And I made a splash page that was the killing, which otherwise happened off camera. And I just felt the story kind of needed it. But where I'm going with this is a few things had to be in place. One, I had to be comfortable enough with my editor that I could say, hey, maybe I think we should do something different. Because for the most part, I really do feel like the writers and editors do their job in those things. If I'm fixing something in the story, or if I think something's wrong, then it's a real problem, or my ego is out of control, one or the other. In this case, Bob agreed with me, and he was willing to listen. And I told him, I said, if you don't want to do this, that's totally cool. The script is there. The story still works. You're the editor. I'll do whatever you think is best. But I just kind of want to feel heard. And he and I had that kind of relationship where anything I thought we should change, he would listen. And, typically when I work on a book, about once every 3 issues, I might say, let's change something. And it's usually so small. It's almost always pacing. Bob agreed with it. He said, you want to talk to the writer? And I said, no. I said, I work for you. I don't work for him. And he doesn't want me telling him how to write his story. I won't want him telling me how to draw. If he has a problem with my art, I hope he would go through you because you're the boss. I really think it's best for somebody to be in charge. And so I was happy to work with him. But I thought I made the story a little bit better. And I also, I don't I never really spoken to Jerry about it, but I don't think he minded because I didn't change the events that happened. It just sort of changed the pacing. And I kind of feel like that's what I'm brought in to do. But to that end, I guess the point I'm ultimately trying to make was the nice thing I really got was I felt like I had a good working relationship with my editor where I felt comfortable to bring up that I wanted to change things. There's one editor I worked for who one time said to me, why can't you just draw it the way it's in the script? And I said, well, I'm trying to tell you why I think we should change it. He wasn't very interested in that at all. And typically that's not a good experience. Everybody wants to feel as though they can suggest something if they think it's a good idea and just have their idea be considered.
Right.
Yeah. But that Dracula book was a lot of fun. There was I got to make things that were gritty. I got to use a lot of blacks. I got to make it really spooky. There were times when I could have drawn, a full figure, but it became a silhouette instead. And I think there were a few things that if you get a chance to look at this book, you'll have a very different experience reading it either as the floppy or the trade paperback. And I really believe that. And I will tell you, the biggest difference is exactly the paper. Bob had what I thought was a really pretty cool idea to put the comic book on a sort of pulpier paper. This is a story that takes place way back when, and he wanted it to feel a little distant. And conceptually, it's a great idea. I'm not sure that that idea was passed around and communicated to everybody. I didn't find out about it until after I had drawn the first issue. I bring all this up because you'll draw it a little bit differently. If you're on pulpy paper, you don't get a bright white to your paper. It's sort of a dull gray. And so if I use a lot of blacks, the areas that I've left to be white, they never are white. They're actually kind of gray. So I'm expecting different midtones and different highlights, depending on what paper I'm using. That information, I don't know if that was communicated to the colorist as well, because when the colorist colored it, he didn't leave a lot of white areas. So what that meant is when you print on wood pulp paper, your blacks usually aren't a true black. They're closer to a gray, and your whites aren't a true white. Everything gets kind of compressed to this area of grays. And so I didn't help the equation for that because I had so many blacks, and the colorist didn't help it because he didn't leave very many whites. So what you do end up with, to Bob's vision, is this thing that feels really kind of grayed out and aged. And I actually thought it was a little bit difficult to see some of it. So when it came time to make a trade paperback, I said, Bob, I'm requesting that instead of putting it on pulp paper, put it on glossy. It'll make your blacks deeper and it'll make your whites look a little bit brighter. And so you'll have a greater spectrum of values. Well, what does that mean? It means you can see details differently. If you have high contrast art, it actually is high contrast instead of graying out. And so I've done this where I've sort of taught, how to make comic books and how to draw them. I said, look at them side by side, see how your experience is different. And I think that's kind of one of the things that makes comic books kind of fun and neat, because the art's the same, the writing's the same, everything's there on the paper. This points out just how different your digital experience might be, because I'm talking about reading something that's only reflected light, whereas digital is projected. Yeah, I can't. I'm never going to overlook past the format when I make a comic book. I think it's incredibly important. I wish I had a better way to wrap up that comment.
No, you're good. So I want to say before Leo asks, his patented last question or so, before we let you go, so our resident shellhead, Justin Cooper, who just came back from a great weekend at Granite State Comic Con, wanted to say that he's a personal fan of your TMNT covers. I believe we're looking at one right now, The Last Ronin.
Yes. So yeah, that one's mine. I've done 3. I did that one, and I did 2 for the Saturday morning adventures.
Oh, nice.
And they're drawn in dramatically different styles. It's kind of funny. My Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles covers, the 3 of them as a body, is one of the things in recent memory that I'm most proud of, and that is because they're so different. When I drew the Saturday morning cartoon version, I really had to draw it in a different style. And I think it's important. I think a really good artist can change their style to suit the subject matter. You know, if I want to draw something that looks, I don't know, horrific, you know, you got to need deep, dark shadows. If I want to draw something that looks really sort of youthful and sprite, like I need bold lines. I mean, it is really difficult to draw in the Richie Rich Archie style and say, I'm going to draw this character and I need, you know, 5 or 6 lines to do it. That's very different than sort of a fastidious, you know, Neil Adams, Bernie Wrightson kind of approach. But that last Ronin cover, I know people who are Turtles guys. I like the Turtles just fine, but Turtles are so wildly popular right now that I thought, okay, if I don't get this right, these guys are going to be all over me. You know, last Ronin was really wonderful and it was a hit. And if I have only one cover I get to make them, I better get it right. So, you know, when I did something here, I wanted something that had this sort of great movie poster sort of quality to it. That big orange moon in the back is so kind of Bob Peak, you know, Apocalypse Now kind of approach. But it's very atmospheric. It's very dark. I think it played to the tone of the original series. And I wanted something that's dramatic. This cover came together for me almost immediately. The thing that I loved about this character design is the 4 weapons, right? We didn't know initially when we read the series who the last Ronin was. We know that he's wielding all the weapons, and I just thought that idea was perfect, that they're brothers and he carries, the one survivor carries on for the other 3, and it's represented through the weapons. And that's really all this cover is trying to show.
Oh, it's beautiful though.
All right.
Yeah.
Leo, do you think? Ask your last question of the night.
Last Ronin was amazing and absolutely loved that cover. I listened to your TED talk. Absolutely loved it.
Thank you.
Well, you hit. I absolutely love that you hit on, you know, how you draw for your own pleasure, but it's also your day job as well, and how to differentiate the two. But putting that off to the side, you know, drawing for your own pleasure, what is something else that you do for fun or dork out about? You know, you probably don't have time, but do you game or you know, you watch horror movies every Friday? You know, what's your thing?
So I've got some answers to that, and they're really disappointing. One of the things is I'm actually a part of the CFA APA group, which you guys will either say, "Oh, I know what that is," or "I've never heard of that." And it is this this club that goes back to about 1983 when it was started. It was founded by Roger Hill, who just passed this last year. And Roger Hill was a comic book historian who, I think he was the gentleman who published Squatron, which was the really early EC Comics fanzine. But he put together a club, which stands for Comic and Fantasy Art Amateur Press Association. And there are only about 40 of us at a time. And it was this group of guys who love comic book art. And we put out a phone book sized book 3 times a year where we write articles for each other. It only has a 40 copy print run. You can probably look on eBay and find a copy or 2 if you can. They're individually numbered. I was at a party. I was at a party I got invited to, which is really, really strange. This is a good story. Where I was told it was sort of a party of some art collectors, and there were several people in the room who knew each other, and they were all going, and they all kind of gave each other the nod and the wink and kind of pointed at me like, "What about him?" And enough people said, "Yeah, he's okay." So I got invited to this thing, and I went, and it was just millions of dollars of art laid out, where these guys all knew each other and they just wanted to share their love of art. And so when you walk in the room and you say, "Oh, there's a San Julian Vampirilla painting on the couch. Cool. There's, you know, a Jeff Jones painting next to it." But I met these guys, and because I had this background loving art outside of comic books, I struck up a conversation. They asked me to join. So I love talking about art in kind of an academic way. That's a good answer for my hobby, which in a way kind of stinks because it's so close to what I really do. But you know, I used to play a lot of ultimate frisbee. That's the answer you're looking for. But I got to the point where I was on the field and I was trying to cover kids who were literally half my age, and that's not much fun, you know. Like, I can still get better at drawing, but I'm going to tell you, my ultimate Frisbee skills were on steep decline. Once I hit 40, I felt it. I was pretty good at 39, and at 44, I was washed up. But I am a sports fan, and I do like math. I do like science. You'll laugh. I always make my wife groan one of my favorite Carl Sagan quotes. Can I end on a Carl Sagan quote?
Totally.
It's so good. I may not get it exactly right, but he always said, if you want to make an apple pie from scratch, you first have to invent the universe. Okay. I kind of like that because I say that to people who want to make comic books. You know, it seems like such a huge thing you're doing. And I say, look, it's just like making an apple pie. You don't have to invent the comic book. There's already the stuff that exists before you. You can find a printer. You don't have to figure out how to get something printed. There are lots of people who can do the things you can't do. But because all those other things are in place, you're going to get to make a comic book, and all you have to do is write it and draw it. When you think about all that has to go into making a comic book, the writing and drawing suddenly gets really easy. So
that's brilliant.
Absolutely. There we go. I laughed at that because it's such a ridiculous comment. But once you think about it that way, you're like, oh yeah, my contribution is really pretty small. This stuff is easy.
And now I can't ask you any more questions because that was perfect.
Yeah, I feel like that's the perfect, like, all right, Leo, let's sign him off and end on that marvelous high note. And don't you dare ask him.
I'm going to email you.
Well, you can ask me anything you want. My problem is that I'll just go on all night. I mean, look, I've got a forum. You're letting me just, talk about something to know about and tell me how great I am. How am I going to cut this off? This is wonderful.
Okay, well, one more.
Well, I was just going to say, that's just what our show is about. Is getting to know you rather than, your work history. We love talking about your work history, but we want to know what's behind it. So and sorry, Kari, finish up.
Oh, no. First off, I am the worst researcher ever when it comes to looking for certain things, because like we see the picture, look, I see your work history and I'm like, okay, going to interview Stuart Sayger. And I don't see pictures of people often. I don't, so I'm like, he's 20. Wow. How did he start drawing in diapers? Nice. That was just insane, so like, but no, you're saying, you're like, oh, I'm declining and stuff. And I'm just like, I seriously thought I was trying to figure out how you started in the industry when you were like still in elementary school.
I get into it late. I get into the comic book industry early by virtue of the comic book store, because I start when I'm 13. But I don't think I self-published a comic book till I was almost 30. I was 29, I think. I mean, I really do come to it late.
But I mean, you have to still get carded in places. To be weird about it.
I got turned away one time when I was 37, which was a long time ago, but they told me I had to have 2 forms of ID with photo. And I said, like, what? And this guy literally said to me, he's like a student ID. And I was like, I'm 37. Like, where am I supposed to be a student? I'm not going to have that. But, okay. I do want to throw this out as a fun little story regarding my age. I didn't think I was ready to make the leap into comics. Everybody I knew was older, and you look up to a certain generation of comic creators. True story. I went to a small one-day hotel convention because I heard this guy David Mack was going to be there, and I'd never met David Mack, but I'd seen his work. And I walked in because I wanted to learn something about making comics. And when I met him, I thought, that guy's not very old. And I think this is just about the time he was going to get Daredevil. So he'd done Kabuki, but not really crossed over to Marvel. And we got talking, and he had done so much. And I think in our conversation, we realized I was 3 months older than him. And that didn't seem like a big deal, but that was like, no, it's time to do this. Like, you're never as good as you want to be, right? So you think I should wait till I'm better. But then I was like, what am I waiting for? When I'm never going to be as good as I want. And here's somebody who, dove in and he was 22. So I don't know if he knows that, but just seeing that and seeing that there was somebody who was young and was good and was making it made me say, all right, I should be doing this now.
And That wasn't the only question I had, by the way. The other one was how much do you do in terms of because I'm a horror author, and we've been working on getting some books put out, and we're doing a lot of different some anthologies that I'm in. We're getting some new illustrations done and stuff. But I personally, I no AI illustrations at all. I'm looking forward to putting together a couple of collections. And do you like to work with people who come out and are just like, hey, let me send you a story and you give me your interpretation of it? If you're getting commissioned for something, do you do things like that, or do you want to have somebody describe specifically a scene? Is that something you've done before or worked with?
I think I've done all of it. I think the thing that I like, I'm not dodging your question, but I'll give you the best answer I have. I kind of like to know what my part is. I kind of like to know what you want me to do. When I worked on LEGO Bionicle, that was a really good job, but LEGO wanted something different, and they gave me a whole bunch of freedom. They weren't, to their credit, they knew they were doing something that was very different than they'd done before, but they weren't exactly sure what they wanted. So I thought, okay, well, I'll make what I think I want. And then there were times they'd say, this isn't quite what we want, but we're not sure what it is. And that's the only situation I think is kind of hard to work with. Now, LEGO was great to work with, and it took us a little bit of going back and forth to sort of nail down what the style was. And once I knew, and I knew what the boundaries were and what they expected from me, great. If I have this much room to play in, then I'll do it. If it's that much, fine. I just kind of like to know where the edges are. The only thing you don't want is when somebody asks you to do a job and then that's not really what they want. Go ahead and draw the character the way you want, and then you do it and they say, well, it's really supposed to look like Harrison Ford. You got to tell me that. But look, I'm somebody who likes telling stories, and I like to write. Okay, so I feel like, I think the thing, in all sincerity, I'm going to put the shoe on the other foot. I think you will be better off to figure out what it is you want out of the person you want to collaborate with. Right? If you know what you want, particularly as a writer, they can't draw anything until you've written it. If you sort of communicate what it is you want and then say, this is the vision I have, do you share it? Do you go against it? And it's okay if they go against it, providing they give you their pitch and then you respond to it and you say, yeah, let's do that. But 9 times out of 10, I feel like a project works best if somebody's in charge. I always thought the nightmare would be, I have no idea what it was like to edit X-Men back in the 80s, but for a while I think it's scripted by Claremont and Byrne, written by Claremont, drawn by Byrne. Those two have the capacity to agree on some things, not agree on others, and then potentially gang up on the editor. And I just felt like, ooh, corralling that sounds hard. What is the vision? I would put somebody in charge, and if you're the writer and you want it to be you, then it should be you.
Okay. Thank you very much. I wanted to go kind of out of comic realm real quick and also be like, or do you do illustration? Did you commission for fiction?
Oh yeah, and
can I hire you at some point? Maybe
you get all that. Sure. I mean, get out the checkbook, but every job is different. I don't know how to put it. I mean, you really want to be invested in it. And I talked about the Bionicle job, and I always thought that drawing robots was my nightmare. I told people that, but in a way, maybe I was the perfect guy to draw that book because I did my best to make them as lifelike as possible. I let them get dirty and bent, and I try to put, I could bend the face as much. They'd allow me to put emotion into them, but I did not want to feel like I was drawing talking automobiles.
Yeah.
Well, that's what made it successful. If I had been, a mech head, it would have been a different book.
Right.
Yeah, looking at most of your work, you don't go, oh, robots.
No, and I used to joke like my nightmare was drawing Iron Man. I had a friend who collected a lot of comic book art, and he had a couple rules about what he collected. One of them I thought was really fascinating was he wouldn't buy any art when he couldn't see the character's face. And so by that he meant like he wouldn't buy Iron Man because Iron Man couldn't have an expression. Right. He felt it was harder to emotionally connect with the art. I said, well, Batman's face is covered. And he says, yeah, but they always make his eyebrows change and everything. So like through that instance, you can see his face. So you go through his collection and there's no Dr. Doom, right? There's no Moon Knight. Anybody whose face is covered, it's just gone.
Wow. Interesting.
That guy was a writer. He was a storyteller too. He thought like that. He wanted that communication.
All right. So So, Stuart, we're coming up on a little bit over an hour. So, that's usually the amount of time that we usually have our guests on. So, just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us today. The stories were awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk about, art and your stories and the books and whatnot. So, before we leave, if people want to, look you up, hit you up or anything like that, what social media are you on, and what's the best way for people to reach you?
Facebook and Instagram are the ones I use most. It used to be there were 2 or 3, and if you got those, you had it covered. But there are so many right now, and those are the 2 I know best. And it seems like if I'm on those 2, I'll get most people. I've got a website at stuartsayger.com. It's always good to go there. But I also really, really, really want to encourage people, if you have the chance, come see me at a convention. I love talking to people in person. Particularly if you want to know anything about my art. I've got different styles. You can touch it, you can handle it, you can see how I work. Usually my hands are stained. See all that white paint? I was painting vampirillas earlier today. This is the stuff I was doing. But that's how they happen.
Ooh, pretty.
And there's nothing like, I always say, if you weren't there, you don't know. So come see me and be there and you will know. But Instagram, Facebook, those are the best.
Awesome. You even had ink on your hands when you handled the Action Comics #1.
Oh man, I did. I love that photo because I'm stained with. There's literally a photo where I'm holding a true Action Comics #1 out of the bag. Steve Borok is there with me, and he had founded CGC, and he made that possible. And my hands are absolutely stained, absolutely, and it looks so great. It looks like I'm holding this, incredible relic with just ink everywhere. It's just yeah, people cringe. It was all dry. Didn't hurt the book at all.
Awesome.
Okay, good.
Well, Stuart, like Drew said, thank you for your time. It was an absolute pleasure. We'd love to have you on again at some point. And we'll definitely keep in touch. When you're ready, just hit the leave studio button, like I mentioned on the bottom, and head on over to the uploads page.
I will do that. I have to I said it, there's a leave button. So thanks so much for having me, you guys. And listen, when you go to another show, any of you, come say hi to me in person. Leo, I don't think you and I have met. I'd love to talk in person. And I really do recommend that you go to the Baltimore Comic-Con. It was wonderful. I can't wait to go back.
What's the next con you're going to be at?
I'm New York Comic Con is coming up. I know I'm going to be at the Columbus December show. I think Columbus, Ohio. That's coming up. There are probably more, but if you don't know for sure, StuartSayger.com has a little tab that says appearances, and it'll tell you everywhere I'm going.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll check.
All right.
Now I'm going to bed.
All right. Thank you so much.
Sleep well, sir. Thank you.
Guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.
That was awesome.
I could talk to him for hours.
Yes, I noticed. I was like, every time
I have this list. I'm like, oh,
I know. Shit. Every time, I'm like, well, it's past an hour. We got a lot of news. Kara's like, oh, but I'm like,
I only have 17 more questions for you off the top of my head.
That's fine, Kari. And I guarantee he would be a great guest to have on any of your Owl Light programs, and talk to him more then.
And back here again. And you know what? We have been just having so many fucking fun guests on lately, guys. Drew has been doing great at getting people lined up, sending stuff out, and getting us all these people that, I just want to squeeze almost every show. I know that sounds horrible, but all these people that we get on are people that it's not just like, oh, we're kind of dredging the bottom of the barrel. It's like, I have things that I am so interested in asking you about. I can't even get to all of them because all of us have questions for you. And it's been wonderful. So,
well, I just wanted to add, you talking about questions. I was so prepared for tonight. I had so many questions. I mentioned his TEDx. I watched that, and I even threw that into a translator, and then threw it through AI to dissect his TEDx to do a deep dive into it. So I got a shit ton of questions for him, and
there you go.
Yeah, but at least we were all prepared. We had an awesome conversation.